So now that you've prepared for the appraisal conversation, here comes running it well. So let's make sure that things stay on track and the conversation goes over smoothly. Let's dive in. How you run an appraisal conversation, I would say that there are four things and one optional step in the middle. Let's characterize the big 1 hour, how you will do it, and then let's zoom in on the core feedback that is there, right? And I'm just like keeping it very simple, very obvious, but just in a way that it'll be easy to observe. First is let's start with saying hello, how are you, what's happening. Okay, so today what I want to do is I just want to recap, what I have come to you with, right? So as part of the appraisal process, you know that we need to have this conversation. I actually think that this is super useful because it helped me to reflect on what you've done over the last 6 months. And I've tried to synthesize some things that I think you're doing really well and a couple of things that I think you can do better. And I want to share this with you. But before we begin, is there anything that you want to share? Right? And then hear where they are, right? If they're like, my dog died last week, this is not exactly the time for you to go sucker punch them, right? You engage on something else and you can be like, do you want to reschedule this conversation? And that's also fine, right? You can, I'm sure like your managers will be okay if you couldn't do the conversation within timelines for genuine reason, for example, right? But make sure you have that time and space to have this conversation. Or if they need to leave to the hospital in 30 minutes, that is also not a good time to have a conversation. Third is then you get into the core, and we'll go deeper into what this is. But after you discuss the core, which is going to take a lion's share of the time, you should also hopefully, ideally, potentially have space at the end of that back and forth. And remember, it's a back and forth. It is not shoving something down their throat. After the back and forth of three, you could also engage with them, say, okay, so what could we do better? Or what should I do differently that can help you to get where you need to go? And that's an important piece to engage on. But depending on how three goes, we may skip that. And finally, you do, in any case, need to land on four, which is what does this mean? What are the next steps coming from here? So, we've discussed that you're fantastic with people and that I really like the way that you manage your time and manage your energy. But one thing I really need you to focus on is on detail orientation, right? Because sometimes there are typos in your emails that doesn't don't look good. Sometimes you just fundamentally miss meetings, which is terrible, right? So I think I just need you to be a bit tighter on this. So what we'll do is what I'll check in the coming time. I'm just making all this up, by the way. Um, so let's make sure what I want to see in the next 2 months is let's make sure that there are three emails which are very, typo free and clear. Here is a couple of ways that you could approach it, and I'll just keep, let's discuss and let's check back in 2 weeks from now, in case there is XYZ we need to do. So this would be the flow, right? You start with making sure we're all on the same page before we begin, then get into the depth of things, and don't leave them hanging. Give closure to them in terms of aligning on next steps, right? So just make sure that your conversation takes that arc, which requires you to have some time also. Now let's get deeper into three. How should you discuss your feedback? And this is something that I was told 10, 12 years ago, and I somehow still remember. So clearly it has some use. Especially when you make mistakes, right? Then you realize that this is what you did wrong. So essentially, Shari, to your question, what I'd shared, it was kind of following this format. So it's called what they call the OILS framework, which is a terrible name. And there's someone else calls it the OIPS framework, where instead of listen, they have pause. But essentially, it is what did you see? What did you see or observe? What is the impact of that behavior that you observed on the world, on the work? And after that, listen, engage, make sure that they're on the same page as you, and then land your suggestion, right? So let me give you two examples. One, which is an example of how it looks in positive feedback, and one, an example when it looks in constructive feedback. So, for example, I saw how you took the time to explain the project to the volunteers today. That was actually really nice. It made them feel welcome and confident, especially when you checked with that fourth person whether they really understood because their English was not good. I thought you did that really well and it set it up for success, right? So, you are doing a great job. I hope you know that. That gives you the entry to hear from them saying, yeah, no, but I wasn't sure. Some people are like self-effacing, some people are more accepting of good feedback. Depending on that, that is where that listen part is helpful to make sure you drive home what has just happened. And once you both are on the same page on what has happened, I think, going forward, I just want you to continue doing this, and maybe a plus one you could add saying maybe you even try doing this more. Have you considered a career in doing this sort of thing, right? Like that's when you lay on that positive and then add on the implication. On the other side, last month, you remember that event we were supposed to do, you did not actually send the poster on time. Now, actually, it wasn't a big deal. But because of that, I think there were a couple of people who wrote back saying that it should have come in earlier. And so that wouldn't look good on us overall, whatever, right? So there is observation and then the impact. Yeah. And you can also caveat saying, I know there are XYZ reasons, I know why it didn't happen, but I just thought it's an important one to highlight to you. So that's the engagement part, the listen part of it. And then let's figure out, okay, yeah, so it's because you're overloaded. I get that. So see, in this one, if you notice, the issue actually wasn't on the person. If you hadn't listened, you would have driven home by saying that you are sloppy, you need to change things. But here it could be simply a structural problem. The structural problem that they're overloaded and they had too much work, or their team member was unwell and you forgot. Many times it's happened to me that I change my feedback on the fly, or like I retract my planned feedback because I realize I forgot a factor. And this part is actually the helpful part. It's the art part, but also the helpful part because that's when they agree and align on the philosophy of what you're saying. And finally, you close out on saying, okay, given this, let's figure out what you do. And maybe you could have just sent us an email saying you couldn't do it. It was just a matter of visibility. It's okay that you didn't do it, but you should just let me know the date first. So that's one thing that I'd look for you to do. So this would be the big picture, right? Saying let's overall have the four parts where we set the context, hear where they are mentally, get a sense of where they are, and then get into the feedback in a structured way, saying there are three things good, here's what they are, two things that you should do differently, here's what they are. Make sure that your discussion is complete, and then make sure that you align on what you need to do next, right? And within the three, go into observation, then impact, then listening and engagement, and then suggestion.
I hope that was helpful. In case you have a story of a time when the appraisal conversation went really well, or a time that a feedback completely flopped, I'd love to hear it. So you can drop that story into the comment below, and let's head over to the last video, which looks at top 10 tips to run successful appraisal conversations and how do you close strong and ensure that the feedback has lasting impact.